Hey, what's up guys, it's Bakes, and thank you for joining me for another episode in my top 10 series. Yes, it has been a little while since my last top 10 video, but getting back into it today with my top 10 favourite Masters of Horror episodes. If you're unfamiliar with the Masters of Horror and don't know what that is, the Masters of Horror was a TV show that ran from the early to mid 2000s roughly. Each episode was its own individual story, each episode ran for roughly an hour, and they were all directed by a quote-unquote master of horror. Some names were bigger than others, John Carpenter, Dario Argento, and then others were questionable if they were masters of horror. But either way, as I said, today we'll be going through my 10 favourite episodes of the Masters of Horror. I have all the episodes within these collector sets. So it is going to be a bit weird. Normally, my top 10's where I hold up something next to me to represent the episode. I'll still do that, but I'll also insert images of what the episode looks like over my shoulder or whatever to keep track. You would also know that I feature these episodes a lot on my channel. If you watch my random horror reviews, I've been through a lot of these episodes within that series, so you'll see some familiar titles, but I'm also excited to talk about some ones that I feel like fly under the radar. So without delaying any longer, let's get into my top 10 favourite Masters of Horror episodes. Alright, so starting off this list, coming in at my number 10 is an episode from Season 1 directed by Larry Cohen. This episode is titled Pick Me Up. Now, if I'm being honest, this is actually an episode that I haven't seen too many times. But the couple of times that I have seen it, I've really enjoyed this one. And for a pretty basic concept, it has a little bit of a twist that keeps it fresh and fun. This one's pretty much about these two serial killers who are pretty much just trying to one-up each other. They're both aware that they're serial killers, and they both end up targeting this one girl, who is essentially our final girl in this episode. And these two killers have different methods, different methods of finding their victims and taking them out. But it pretty much turns into this cat and mouse. These two, as I said, just trying to one-up each other. The final girl catches on that they're both killers and she's trying to get away from them. And it's just fun. As I said, it's pretty basic, but I was engaged for its whole hour runtime, which isn't very long, but as I said, it helps that from start to finish, this one doesn't seem to drag. Quite enjoyable. So coming in at my number 10, just scraping in, is Larry Cohen's Pick Me Up. Alright. Coming in at my number 9, also from Season 1, this time directed by Don Coscarelli. This episode is titled Incident on and Off a Mountain Road. So if you're a fan of slasher movies or slasher style anything, this one's going to be right up your alley, because out of any of the episodes in the Masters of Horror, this one is the most traditional to a slasher. As you can probably tell from the title of the episode, it takes place on and off a mountain road in the middle of the night. Our lead, I'm pretty sure she has like a car accident or something, so that's how she ends up on the side of a road. And that's when our slasher comes into play. His name, I'm pretty sure, is Moonface, if I remember right. He's just this big hulking dude with this pale face, and it turns, as I said, pretty much into a traditional slasher. It's pretty to the numbers, but I mean, it's fun. It's just a cat and mouse, her running through the woods, him catching up with her, people getting picked off along the way. As I said, it's pretty basic, but who doesn't love a pretty traditional to the numbers slasher every now and then? So coming in at my number 9 is Incident on and Off a Mountain Road, directed by Don Coscarelli. So moving on, and coming in at my number 8, again is another episode from Season 1, this time directed by John Landis, and the episode is titled Deer Woman. The plot for this one is a series of bizarre murders start happening in this small town, and at first the police think it's just a run-in with a deer because there's hoof prints over the bodies, and there's deer seen on site of the murders. However, they change their mind and start thinking it was maybe a person, because the murders are just too bizarre, brutal, and gory. But the lead investigator on the case is sort of split in two minds. He doesn't think it's an animal, but he also doesn't think it's a human. And yeah, that's basically our story for this one. If the title didn't give it away, being Deer Woman, this is pretty much a were-deer movie or episode. And if the title didn't give it away, it's directed by John Landis, who is probably most well known for directing An American Werewolf in London. And like the previous mentioned two on this list, there's nothing mind-blowing happening in this episode. There's nothing like a grand twist or anything. You pretty much know what's going on right from the start. But this episode's fun from start to finish. this is one of the funnier episodes, at least in my opinion, in the series. There's good jokes and all that work in this episode, but then again, it's the idea of it being a were-deer, which you don't see very often, if not at all. I also really like the lore and the storytelling of what a deer woman is and how that is worked into the plot. I really found that interesting. But this is an episode that just works. Again, as I said, it's nothing mind-blowing, but it's an engaging watch from start to finish. This is actually the first episode on this list so far that I have done a full-length review of before. So if you want to know my thoughts of this episode in deeper detail, check out my random horror review of Deer Woman. But as I said, coming in at my number 8, directed by John Landis, is Deer Woman. Staying with this set again, so again from season 1, moving on to my number 7 on this list, is directed by a no doubt master of horror, John Carpenter, and this episode is titled Cigarette Burns. Again, just like Deer Woman, I have done a full-length review of this episode, so check out my random horror review of Cigarette Burns if you want to know deeper detail. But the plot for this one is basically this guy is hired to find this so-and-so forgotten or lost film. Apparently, when you watch this movie, it makes you go insane and kill yourself. There was this festival that played a long time ago where the movie played on the big screen, and I think the cinema ended up burning down and everyone died and everything. So apparently the tapes are lost. But as I said, this guy is hired to go and find it. And that's pretty much the story in this one. This one is really mind-bending. It's very John Carpenter, lots of suspense, really engaging story. There's lots of creepy imagery in this one as well. Without spoiling anything, I always think of that angel with its wings and everything. That is really creepy. But I've always found this episode to be really engaging. This is an episode that I really do enjoy, but again, don't come back to quite often, only because, I don't know, it's not a very light-hearted episode. It is pretty dark, this one, but it is really enjoyable. So coming in at my number 7, again from season 1, directed by John Carpenter, is Cigarette Burns. Coming in at my number 6, finally getting to an episode from season 2, directed again by John Landis, so a second appearance from a director on this list. Also, this episode is titled Family. This episode reminds me very much of Tales from the Crypt, one of those kind of light-hearted, campy episodes, but still got a dark and sinister twist to it. Basically, it's about this guy named Harold. He lives in this white picket fence neighborhood. He's pretty quiet and kind of keeps to himself. But these new neighbors move in, and he starts to become infatuated with the wife in particular. And you start to sort of figure out that Harold is not all that he seems, and he's got something sort of sinister going on with his family. So I'm going to sort of leave the plot there. As I said, this episode to me feels very Tales of the Crypt. It is very light-hearted and kind of way a little bit cheesy and campy, but it's one of the more fun episodes. And again, I have done a review of this episode, and thinking back on my review of this episode and when I did it, it was a little while back. I think I gave it like a 6 or a 6.5, but it's definitely higher than that. I really enjoyed this episode every time I think back on it. It's one of the more rewatchable ones because, as I said, it's a bit more lighthearted and goofy. But, there still is a lot of thrills and scares with this one. So coming in at my number 6 is John Landis's Family. Staying with this set, so again from season 2, this time directed by Dario Argento. The episode is titled Pelts. This episode is one that has grown on me a lot. Like, I've always enjoyed Pelts a lot. But over recent time, it's definitely become one of my favorites and one of the more rewatchable ones. In this one, our lead is played by Meatloaf. He basically makes these fur coats, and he doesn't make them. He gets people to work pretty much minimum wage and make these coats for him. He ends up trapping a bunch of raccoons that were off this land that sort of had this curse on them. I can't remember the plot entirely, but it's something like that. There was this land that was cursed, and that's where he traps the raccoons. And he eventually, gets their pelts and makes it into a fur coat. And anyone that wears the fur or messes with the fur ends up getting this curse put on them, and things don't work out well for them. What sticks out to me in this episode is, one, the story. The story is just really unique, and I find it again, kind of like the last one, very Tales of the Crypt, mess with something you're not supposed to and get your comeuppance sort of thing. And also the gore. This one is one of the gorier episodes, but it just works so well. I really enjoy Pelts. Out of all the ones on this list at the moment, it's kind of one of the ones that I want to rewatch the most. So coming in at my number 5 is Dario Argento's Pelts. Alright, so moving on to my number 4, and it's actually the only episode that isn't included as part of any of these sets, however I do own it in an individual copy. It's from Season 1, directed by Takashi Miike, and the episode is titled Imprint. Now, I don't know the actual reason why it's not included as part of the Season 1 set, however I do have my theories and suspicions. My idea is that because this episode is by far the most brutal and disturbing episode of all of the Masters of Horrors, that they must have been just a little bit hesitant to include it on the Season 1 set. And that does make sense, because by far this is the most brutal and disturbing Masters of Horror episodes. By all means, there are a few episodes that do go into darker territory and provide gore and that sort of thing. But this one just includes a lot of scenes of torture and scenes that will make you squirm and cringe. And we'll get into the plot for this one. So, an American journalist travels to Japan to find this prostitute that he has this relationship with. He left and he was always meant to come back and get her. However, upon return, he can't find her, and he ends up meeting this other woman who sort of fills in the backstory of what's been going on and what's happening in their lives and with these women. And with these flashbacks is where the extreme stuff is included into the story, because as I said, there's scenes of torture, there's things that are going to make you squirm and cringe, and it's going to be hard to watch. Not to the point where this episode's anything like snuff territory. Think of Martyrs or Inside or something like that. There's going to be scenes that make you cringe. However, with all that aside, the story in this one is also really good. One of the better stories in the whole of Masters of Horror. Just really engaging, and Takashi Miike does a really good job of directing in this one. But with all the good storytelling and scenes of torture and things that stick with you like that, the one thing that stays with me from this episode is the ending. From the first time I saw this episode and the ending, my jaw was on the floor, and the ending is literally imprinted into my brain, pun not intended. That ending is insane. This is one of the episodes that it's just stuck with me. And I don't mind, going and watching a more disturbing or pushing the envelope kind of thing every now and then. And I think that's what I like most about this one. All of the other Masters of Horrors, as I said, some of them are a little bit goofy, some of them do go into darker territory, but this one is just the next level above, and I like its uniqueness for that. So coming in at my number 4 is Takashi Miike's Imprint. Moving on to the top 3, back at Season 1 again, directed by Lucky McKee, and this episode is titled Sick Girl. I've spoken a lot about this episode before on my channel. Our lead in this one is an entomologist. That's where they study insects and bugs, I think. I hope I'm reading that right on the back, entomologist. She's very to herself, she's quiet, she's introverted, she's socially awkward. But she gets in this relationship with a girl that's very similar to her, and they start moving in together in their apartment and whatever. But because she's an entomologist, she has a lot of bugs and insects that she keeps at her place. One day, a mystery bug, I guess, is dropped off at her house, and it escapes, and it starts to cause a little bit of havoc. If you like Lucky McKee's film May, you're going to love this movie. Mix that with a film like Bite, which I've also done a review of before. This one's going to be right up your alley, and I love both of those movies, and this is just a perfect combination. I love Sick Girl. As I said, I've spoken about it so many times on my channel. I really love this one. So I'm going to keep it short and sharp. Lucky McKee's Sick Girl from Season 1 coming in at my number 3. So coming in at my number 2 might be a surprise for some people, just because it is one of the more goofier concepts for Masters of Horror episodes. However, from my first time watching it, I've just completely fallen in love with this episode. So it's from Season 2, directed by Tom Holland, and the episode is titled We All Scream for Ice Cream. Doesn't that title just sound ridiculous? And as I said, the concept is a little bit goofy. We'll get into it. But for the longest time, I did put off this episode because just reading We All Scream for Ice Cream and seeing the cover for that episode, I was like, no, I'm just going to put that off for as long as I can. But yeah, I've just fallen in love with this episode. So the plot for this one is there's this clown named Buster the Clown, a mentally handicapped man who sells ice creams. The neighborhood kids play a prank on him that ends up going wrong and he ends up dying. Some time passes, the kids are now adults, and they return home, and Buster the Clown returns, and they have to fight against his evil. To me, this has always just been Tom Holland's version of It. You know, a little bit more goofier, obviously, but same sort of thing, a killer clown with supernatural powers, and kids returning as adults to face off against the evil. This episode's just so much fun. Buster the Clown is a little bit, goofy. Some of the effects are a little bit goofy, besides the way that Buster is now killing these returned kids that are adults. Spoiler alert, because I just have to say it, he turns them into ice cream, which might sound ridiculous, but the effects are insane. I love it. That one scene where the guy's in the hot tub and he starts melting away. Sorry, I had to just spoil it, but I love that scene. As I said, this episode just caught me off guard, but it's so much fun from start to finish. It's an easy one to chuck on and just switch your brain off because it is just so enjoyable. So coming in at my number 2 from season 2, Tom Holland's We All Scream for Ice Cream. Alright. And finally getting to my number 1, which might not be a surprise to a lot of people because this is kind of the fan favourite episode of the series. From season 1, directed by Dario Argento, here we have Jennifer. Oh, man, every time I watch Jennifer, I just like it more and more. The plot for this one is this detective rescues this strange girl from being murdered. But upon getting a closer look at her, she is maybe not quite human. She's got this killer body, which is part of the plot. She's got this beautiful body, super sexy, but her face is fucked up. Her face is just like not human. And it's so, as I said, it's part of the plot. I wasn't just commenting on it. A lot of people are like, oh, great body. And then they see her face and they're like, ugh. But, he starts to become infatuated with her and she's got this thing for him as well. And I'm just going to sort of leave it there. I've always sort of described this story as like a succubus/siren sort of story. This one's just so good. The humor in it, because a lot of that, I know I keep bringing it up, but that she's got a great body, but hideous face plays into it, and it's actually quite funny. The gross scenes in this, they always make me gag, like when she's drooling and doing all that shit. This episode's so gross, but oh man, I can't talk enough about Jennifer. And as I said, it's probably not a surprise because everyone who likes Masters of Horror seems to have Jennifer at least in their top 3. Such a great episode. I'm not going to ramble too much on this one. I have done a full-length review again of Jennifer, so if you want to know my thoughts of that, check out that review. But yeah, coming in at my number 1 from season 1, Dario Argento's Jennifer. Alright, there we go guys, through my top 10 list of my favourite Masters of Horror episodes. Before we get to my outro, I'm going to do a quick little recap and also include which episodes in this list I have done random horror reviews of before, just so you guys know. If you want deeper details of my thoughts of those episodes, you can check them out. But coming in at my number 10, I had Pick Me Up. Coming in at my number 9 was Incident on and Off a Mountain Road. Coming in at my number 8 was Dear Woman, which I have done a full-length review of. Number 7 was Cigarette Burns, which I also have done a full-length review of. Number 6 was Family, another one I have done a full-length review of. Number 5 was Pulse. Number 4 was Imprint. Number 3 was Sick Girl, which I have done a full-length review of. Number 2 was We All Scream for Ice Cream. And number 1 was Jennifer, which I have done a full-length review of. So thank you for joining me in this top 10 list, guys. As I said, I haven't done a top 10 list in the longest time. I always mean to, but I end up doing a random horror review or other things instead. But I'm going to try and make sure that this isn't a series that is forgotten about. But let me know your favourite Masters of Horror episodes if you have seen the show before. I wish it was a show that just came back. You know, there's plenty of new horror directors that are up and coming, and some that you could question are new Masters of Horror. So I'd love to see this series get a reboot. I'm not sure if it's really likely, but I'd love to see something like that. But thank you for joining me in this list, guys, and I'll see you for another video soon. Peace.